Hey everybody, welcome back to Horror Trans. My name is Stephanie Bree. I am a transgender woman who talks about all things horror. And today I'm looking at the 2009 Friday the 13th reboot slash remake from, I believe, Platinum Dunes. So, this movie came out in the thick of the Platinum Dunes remake obsession period from the early 2000s. And this was one of the last ones they did, most likely because they were getting diminishing returns. Actually, I take that back. I don't know if this is Platinum Dunes. I know it's Paramount. Let me backtrack on that. I know it's Paramount, but I actually don't know who produced this movie. And the reason why I don't know is because the rights to Friday the 13th as a franchise and Jason as a character are convoluted and messy. Different individuals and firms and companies and producers have different rights, different pieces of the rights. And so getting everybody to come together and cooperate has been a bitch and a half. So I honestly don't know who produced this movie, but that's not important to this video. The question is, do you buy this on DVD and put it in your collection, Blu-ray, whatever, or do you watch it and forget it? That's the question that I like to ask. So, let's talk a little bit about Friday the 13th, the franchise, briefly. It started in 1980, filmed in 1979, and ran almost concurrently until 2003, culminating with Freddy vs. Jason. They did something like 10 or 11 movies in that time span. So, this was actually, I believe, the 13th film in the franchise, which may have played a part in why they haven't done any more. But here's the thing. During that time, the franchise changed hands. It went from Paramount to New Line Cinema. And we can all agree New Line Cinema didn't give a shit about this franchise. So when it came back to Paramount, they were also indifferent. They were like, oh yeah, we used to make money off of those, but I don't know, whatever. That was 30 years ago. So, there was this, because Platinum Dunes had been successful with their horror remakes, there was this movement to remake 70s and 80s horror movies for modern audiences. And this was a byproduct of that period. So, the filmmakers went back to the roots, calling it just Friday the 13th, so it's sort of a reboot / reimagining of the original story. So it does retell parts of the lore that were established in Friday the 13th Part 1 and 2. It also sort of retells some of the events from Friday the 13th 1, 2, and 3. And I say sort of, because it definitely takes liberties. Now, Friday the 13th, as a franchise, was made during the slasher boom of the early to mid-80s. By 1988, the slasher boom was winding down, which is why Paramount wanted to, wash their hands of this franchise and, move on to something else. So, that's your backstory, which is relevant because this movie is fucking weird. And the reason why I mention that is because this movie does not look like or feel like or have any, tonally or visually anything at all in connection with the original franchise. This movie is Friday the 13th in name only. This is basically a Victor Crowley Hatchet film, but it's actually Jason instead of Victor Crowley, is what this is. This is not a Friday the 13th film. And what I mean by that is you have the skeleton of a Friday the 13th film. You got pot smoking, we'll say kids, teenagers, 20 somethings, and you've got Jason, and you've got titties, lots and lots of titties. So you have like the skeleton of a Friday the 13th movie. But the problem is, this movie came out post-Saw, when the second big craze going on at the time, the big thing was horror remakes. But concurrent to the horror remakes was torture porn. So here you had a studio trying to remake an 80s slasher film during peak torture porn season. And so they were like, yeah, we definitely got to have boobs in this movie, for sure. And we got to have, like, you know, body count in this movie, for sure. We got to have the kills. But, like, they missed the memo on what made the Friday the 13th movies fun. They left out all the fun. You know, there's no enjoyable characters. You're not rooting for anyone at all to live. You're just like, okay, can you just please murder them? Thank you. And then when he does, you're like, good. But also, is that the best you can do? Come on, dude. You did better than that in 1987. The biggest problem I have with this movie is, tonally, it feels like it was made in 2009. And I'm sorry, but there were not any good horror movies made in 2009. That was like 2007 to about 2017, that decade was the dark times for horror. Like, just, they weren't making good horror movies during that period. I mean, like, here and there, sprinkled throughout, but by and large, horror was on the downward spiral during that decade, and this was right in the thick of it. So, you know, the 80s Friday the 13th movies had campiness. They were cheesy. They were B movies. This was low budget, but that's not a B movie. This was a low budget movie the studio didn't take seriously, and whoever made this movie, the filmmakers, the writer, the director, etc., the actors, nobody had either seen a Friday the 13th movie, from what I'm seeing, or they just didn't understand what made Friday the 13th movies work in the first place, or they just didn't give a shit, or all of the above. Now, you do have some of the earmarks of a Friday the 13th movie. You do have the iconic hockey mask, and you have a whole segment of him finding the hockey mask. Well, let's do good and bad. So the good, let's talk about the good things I like about this movie. The first segment with those early campers, the ones who were in the woods, doing campfires, campfire stories. Jason shows up with the bear trap and fucks everybody up. Thumbs up. That first, I want to say 20 to 30 minutes of the film felt like Friday the 13th. It really did. The remaining 50 to 60 minutes of the film felt like fucking somebody, watched a SNL sketch of Friday the 13th and were like, oh, okay, that's what Friday the 13th is? Got it. And it was like, no, you don't got it. I don't like the retread of the brother looking for his missing sister. We did that in Friday the 13th Part 4, and it didn't work in Friday the 13th Part 4 because it didn't make sense. The timeline didn't fucking make a lick of sense because, it was just fucking like, wait a minute, she died on Friday. Today is Sunday. You've literally been in the woods for conservatively 6 months looking for her, but she just died 2 days ago. So that doesn't make any fucking sense. This movie, to its credit, the brother looking for the missing sister storyline, the timeline makes a little bit more sense, except for why the fuck did Jason, spoilers, keep her in a cage? Now, we find out why, but it's so uncharacteristic of Jason. Again, it was trying to be a nod to Friday the 13th Part 2, which leads me to believe somebody on the production, had story notes or something from either the studio executives or somebody was like, wait a minute, we have to be true to the original or series somewhat. And then they had like, I don't know, bullet points, and this was one of the bullet points. But it wasn't very effective for me. It didn't make any sense. Now, to its credit, again, it handles the Jason being confused about who his and isn't his mother better than Friday the 13th Part 2, because Jenny is a 20-something-year-old blonde with girl, skinny, short, blue eyes, and his mother is like in her late 50s, short hair, gray hair, stocky, tall. He's not going to look at Jenny just because she's wearing her sweater and be like, Mommy, is that you? I didn't buy that. That was one of the problems I have with Friday the 13th Part 2. It was clever, but at the same time, it was like, are you fucking kidding me? Give me a break. This movie, to its credit, handles that, I think, a little bit better. Because what we see of the girl that he thinks is his mom, or reminds him of his mom, and we see pictures of his mom, they do look a lot alike. Enough alike that he could be confused in his, traumatized, I'm going to say traumatized state of mind. He could very easily be confused. Whereas Jenny looks nothing like his mom. He's going to be like, bitch, get my mother's sweater off. So I never did care for that segment in Friday the 13th Part 2. Now, the movies, the original series, were campy. This one was not. It had a mixture of likable characters who were usually caricatures, but they were still likable, with some, characters that you were just like, okay, you suck, I hope you die, who usually did. But for the most part, the characters were generally likable. God damn it. So, this movie didn't have that. There were no likable characters. And it wasn't campy or cheesy at all. It was, like, way too straight-laced. But it was, like, dumb. Not cheesy, just dumb. Douchey. The characters were douchey, and I was like, please, for the love of God, rip his spine out through his asshole or something. Excuse me. God damn it. I think I'm coming down with a cold. So, I had to pause the video to blow my nose and take some Sudafed. I apologize for that. I lost my train of thought. So, not campy, douchey characters. So, what else is there? Well, there's the music. The original Friday the 13th franchise had a score either written by or inspired by music written by Harry Manfredini, which I was not a big fan of, but it's iconic and people recognize it. That score was missing from this film. But it also heavily featured 80s hair metal of the time. This movie did not. The music sounded very 2009, which to me was like, I'm torn on. It's like, yeah, I get it. It's a modern remake, whatever. But also, you want me to connect this movie to the films from the 80s, and you're not going to at least give me an 80s hair metal soundtrack? That's a strike against the movie. Forgettable characters, forgettable plot, unforgivable sins of the characters, just awful music. There's not a lot to like about this movie. There really isn't. On the flip side of that, there's not a lot to hate about it either. It's a mediocre film. It's not so atrocious that I'm screaming at the camera, you fuck nuts, you really blew it. But I'm also like, this doesn't have me excited or like, ooh, that was awesome. No, it's just mediocre at best. Did I enjoy it? No, not really. Do I own it on DVD? Yes, I do. But I'm a fan of the franchise. I own all of them on DVD. Now, I do own the Killer Cut. So I want to put that out there. But I've seen both edits of the movie, and it doesn't make a fucking... It doesn't make a fucking bit of difference. The movie sucks either way, whichever version you're watching. The killer cut is just more gore, I guess, but it doesn't make it any better, really. It's still not a better movie. You're still watching it, like, scratching your head going, what the fuck? Did you guys even watch a Friday the 13th movie in your life, ever? No, probably not. This is a rent, as far as I'm concerned. While I do own it on DVD, and that's the asterisk. If you're a Jason fan, or a fan of the Friday the 13th franchise, you might have room in this your collection. If you're a fan of the franchise and you just have to have them all. Otherwise, if you're a fan of the franchise, you're probably going to want to stay away from this movie because it disrespects the franchise. And I'm not here for that. I'm like, no, if you're going to make another Friday the 13th movie, set it in 1988, do your homework, and like hire as many of the people who were there in the originals as you can. And that includes Tom Savini, if that's at all possible. Harry Manfredini, if he's still alive, I don't even know. Just get as many people who were involved in any of the original 8 films if you're gonna reboot this fucking franchise. Otherwise, don't fucking bother. Let it rest.